Hello, everyone.
Hello.
All right. Welcome back to another instantiation of the Jewish Book Club. We are reading The Great Partnership, Science, Religion, and the Search for Meaning by Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. This week, we read chapters 12 and 13, The Problem of Evil, and When Religion Goes Wrong. Thank you all for joining us once again this week.
Thank you for running the show, Elena.
Thank you for starting it, Ben. And of course, I apologize to any viewers of Father Stephen and Jacob's ongoing love saga, but we were here first. And the polling has finished for the next book in the book club. The next
Wait,
book
is it not going to be like at the end where you leave everybody so they can
do
stay?
you want to tear off the Band-Aid now or later,
No.
Ben? All right. Well, what are your guys' opinion? What do you think? Who do you think won, Ben?
Well, first of all, Andrew really wants to know.
Well, yeah. No idea, Ben?
Yeah, I don't know. Is it another Soloveitchik? Is there a return or I don't know. I mean, something with repentance. That would be my guess.
Andrew has continuously been blocked. Nothing about repentance. But you were right, Ben. It's another Soloveitchik book. This one is The Lonely Man of Faith. The next winner, the next runner-up was actually On Repentance by Soloveitchik also. So, and I just want to say that Jacob, he tries to put out all this Kabbalah, but the Misnagdim, they're more successful on this channel. So, all right. Yes, hello, Trey. All right. Starting off, we always blame Sandy. So this week, it's going to be Emma. Emma has to go first.
I'm pretty sure I went first last week.
Yeah, because Sandy wasn't here, but I didn't mean for you to go first last week, but this week I mean for you to go first.
Okay, well, it's been a rough day, so we'll see.
Well, the book club can only make it go up, Emma.
That is true. I mean, we might as well start with chapter 12.
Sounds good.
It is the first chapter. I think it was in here, have a question for Elijah about his opinion. I think it's in chapter 12, the bicameral brain discussion makes another appearance. Maybe that was in chapter 13 and we can start there instead. We get back into the right brain, left brain. And I was wondering what you thought of that reappearance. I think it's actually 13, not 12.
Where religion goes wrong, yeah. Where would it be in that one? I don't really remember.
It's towards the conclusion, I think.
Towards the conclusion. Because he talks about dualism and monotheism.
Yeah.
Oh, page 264.
Maybe it's in
mine.
264.
In my one, yeah. So I've got like...
with a bicameral brain, which allows us to experience the world in two fundamentally different ways as a subject and an object, I and me, capable of standing both within and outside our subjective experience. In that fact lies our moral and intellectual freedom, our ability to mix emotions and reflection, our capacity for both love and justice, attachment and detachment, in short, our humanity. It is this that the reductivist, the scientist who denies the integrity of spirituality, or the religious individual who denies the findings of science fails to understand. This is what William Blake meant when he prayed, "My God, keep us from a single vision and Newton's sleep." Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you for finding it.
It was Sandy who found it. Thank you for Sandy.
Thank you, Sandy.
Welcome.
I know you had opinions on how he ties that in.
Yeah. It's
Other
strange that
times.
it's like the subject and object. Now I've heard of this subject and object stuff before, but again, like it kind of always shows up randomly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, okay, is the Hebrew Bible telling us to be subject or object? And what is science? Science, I guess science tells us to be an object, so then the Hebrew Bible tells us to be a subject.
I
I mean,
guess.
I think Smith said something like that before.
I think his point is that we do both at once,
For sure.
or we should do both at once.
Yeah, I guess he's trying to eventually make an integration of science and religion in some way. I'm just not sure. It feels a little bit strange though to this point. Like, I don't know why we got to the problem of evil, where religion goes wrong, and then he's like, now I want to harmonize science and religion.
Well, it kind of makes sense in the why religion goes wrong chapter, because his argument is that's how you prevent religion from going wrong,
By
is by
integrating these
harmonizing. And if you lean too far into
one or the other.
one or the other, you cause problems.
I think on page 256 he was talking about, like, when I think of that, I go back to one of his second point of danger, which was dualism. Yeah, the second danger, because he says dualism resolves cognitive dissonance by saying, in effect, it wasn't us and it wasn't God, so it must be them, whoever them happens to be. It turns penitential cultures into blame cultures, externalizing evil, projecting it on a scapegoat, thereby redefining the faithful as victims. We, our nation, or our people, are the victim of someone else's crime. Since there's little or no overt evidence of this, it follows that the children of Satan must be masters of disguise, practitioners of sorcery. I feel like we're back in the chapter with evil. Practitioners of sorcery, or more modern dark arts. And from there, it's a short step to seeing them as subhuman. For Nazis, Jews were vermin, lice. For the Hutus of Rwanda, the Tutsi were Inyenzi, cockroaches. They can then be killed without compunction. There's a straight line from dualism to demonization or dehumanization to genocide. And he talked about some of those things early. So he said dualism is the single most effective doctrine in persuading good people to do evil things. And when you were, where is it? When you're over on page 264, where he's talking instead about the two-part brain, allowing us to experience the world in those two fundamentally different ways. It's not because he's separating one thing from another so that one side is good and the other side is evil. He's actually saying you've got two parts for a reason. Like it gives you the perspective on things. And so where did it go? And what he said at the bottom that grabbed me, skipping that paragraph after what you read, he says the result of banishment of religious moderates would be the squaring up of two sets of extremists, radical secularists on one hand, religious radicals on the other, each convinced that opponents are irredeemable. There's only one perspective on reality and only one saving truth. He goes on more, but that thing where it's that cutting off of, and I do see the lack of I do see that hard division as a danger, because we see that in the world all the time right now. Whereas, even just listening to Jacob and Father Stephen, they've got opposing views on something. They see different realities in it. They're talking to each other, they value each other. They're still gonna mash back and forth on what the points are. But the essence of what I see there is that they would love to come to a conclusion, not a winning conclusion, but they would like to come to a conclusion. You know what I mean? And that's hard for us as people.
I don't know what you mean by necessarily conclusion.
They'd like to, when you work on a project, anything together, even if it's sorting something out and searching out all of the different meanings of it, at some point it comes together.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like that. And you decide, and then you do what you're going to do with whatever that project was. So whether they come to something where they find a common agreement on something, whether,
yeah,
it doesn't have to be a set outcome that we determine right now by standing back and watching. But there's a purpose to everything, and there's a purpose to why we have these kind of conversations with each other. And I think it's that instead of cutting out the middle and only ending up with the ends of each, of it, you want to engage the entire thing. You don't want to lose your middle, And when we were talking about the brain earlier, sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but when we were talking about the brain earlier and you guys were bringing up the two parts, I remember thinking about my friend whose son does not have a corpus callosum. And so therefore the two sides have a communication disability. They don't communicate well together because they're missing the key component of communication. That's the job of the corpus callosum, is to let the two sides talk to each other. And so I'm kind of like, I don't even know, did he mention that?
The corpus callosum?
Yeah,
no, I don't think he went into that.
Because we've got these two sides of our brain and they each do amazing things. But they're meant to do it together. Is that where, when you're talking, what you said earlier, about what he's doing with, when he's pointing this out, that I've never heard the word bicameral either. I forgot to look it up. So, what is a bicameral brain?
I'm pretty sure it just means having two sides or two halves.
Okay.
It looks like cameral means chamber.
Okay.
So bicameral means two-chambered.
Sorry, I kind of jumped in there. Anybody else?
Trey?
Volume.
Can't hear
We
you.
can't really hear you.
We're talking about the problem with evil, right?
We're in the when religion goes wrong.
Where this goes. Right. I think I was really surprised. Sachs actually had a spine in this chapter. Beforehand, he kind of was just I guess it kind of sucks. And then this time he was like, no, you both can be wrong, which I liked. It was good to see Sachs stand up for himself. That's all my comments.
But if he calls them both wrong, does that mean that he's rejecting the Aristotelian law of the excluded middle?
I would say he explicitly talks about that at the beginning of this
Sorry,
chapter.
it was meant to be a joke.
Okay. Yeah. No, he is very anti-excluded middle.
Have you ever been so angry at a law of logic?
Because the entire world isn't perfectly logical,
Hmm,
and you think this is logic's fault.
exactly.
Oh no, he talked about that in chapter 12.
Yeah.
Like a lot, actually.
Yep.
That's what
Anybody else have anything on chapter 13 that they want to bring up?
Chapter 13 is the right how it goes wrong, how religion goes wrong.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Hmm.
The last page.
See, like, seems a lot of what Rabbi Sachs' book.
What's that?
You're cutting off, Trey.
Oh, you know what? You go, Sandy. I'll wait.
I was just gonna say the last page again reminded me of Jacob and Father Stephen, where Jacob made a comment about why he went on YouTube. Because here it says religions work best when they are open and accountable to the world. When they develop into closed, totalizing systems and sectarian modes of community, when they place great weight on the afterlife or divine. Actually, the whole thing there. But what I really underlined was that thing of being open and accountable. You know, like we can say all kinds of things, but even doing this, like we're saying stuff to the world and they can form an opinion on our opinion on this book. And what we share, like, I don't know, it's like today I'm really thinking we're not just reading a book, but we're revealing our thoughts on how it connects with our beliefs, you know, in a way. And like, you know, what does it say here? I'll finish reading that. So when they develop into closed, totalizing systems, sectarian modes of community, when they place great weight on the afterlife or divine intervention into history, expecting the end of time in the midst of time, they can become profoundly dangerous, for then there's nothing to check their descent into fantasy, paranoia, and violence. The answer is not no religion, which is impossible and undesirable since we are meaning-seeking animals, but the critical dialogue between religion and science, the necessary conversation between the twin hemispheres of our bicameral brain that alone can save us from danger and despair. So it kind of sounds like he gave us two opposing viewpoints inside one head for a reason. You know, like the one side is all logic, the other is all creativity, and they have to talk to each other.
I think I mean that's it sounds kind of like the theme of those contrasts that he puts together, even though he caveats in the beginning, right, that it's not as clean as that, but when he was speaking about explanation versus interpretation, right, like science seeking explanations or is a tool for explanation, and the religion being the interpretation, right, it's like you're trying to understand what the meaning, I mean, this is what he was talking about in the problem of evil. You're not the right way, at least the way that he his proposition there is that you should seek, like you should try to find out the meaning, like the interpretation of the event, of the evil thing that happened, right, to you or to somebody else, versus trying to explain it in some way or seeking an explanation. So Yeah, I mean, I always find the commentary about like the interpretation to be something that's very interesting. So when he talks about hard texts, um, he talks about kind of like he goes through kind of how interpretation came to be, or like the changes within Judaism and how and maybe why they interpreted something, or the shifts that occurred. So that's very, I don't know, I found that just interesting because it's not something that I going or learning more about the tradition was just not, well, was not something that was clear to me, that was so strong in Judaism about this interpretation and this creative collaborative force. The kind of Soloveitchik talks about too, right? This creative thing is what you, one of the biggest tasks, responsibilities that you have as a person together with God, right? So that's just, and it was interesting how he showed like how in history there were these moments, these failures, you can call them, in Judaism particularly, but I'm sure there's equivalences like in Christianity where something happened and then an interpretation needed to happen, right? Like a move needed to kind of like needed to occur. The same as like with the oral Torah becoming not oral anymore. That was like a move that was needed to happen because people or one particular person, right, a generation didn't think that Judaism would last if those things would not be more codified.
Yeah. I have so much underlining on that on page 252 there where he's talking about interpretation, and like, there's a lot more explanation around it than I would have realized. And
Around what?
oh, when he's on page 252, he's breaking down that the hard text stuff and talking about why the hard texts need interpretation. But then he's talking about, like going from literal meaning, to applicate things, moving from text to application with, the danger of doing that without interpretation. And I get the feeling then that in some respects, interpretation might be being used differently than I'm used to. Or maybe it's just that a lot of Christianity, there's not that active interpretation ongoing between people, like sitting down and like when I'm watching you go and as you go through the Pirkei Avot, like there's this whole dynamic. You can have somebody explaining something, but at the same time, there's what are your questions? Like, we're trying to do that here. But when I listen, you obviously know enough about the text that when you sit down to do it, to me, that in a way, I'm wondering if that's a form of interpretation that is being got at in the book here.
Yeah,
people just kind of chew it together almost, like you're. And that's not usually what, in my mind, what I learned of isn't, interpretation happens behind closed doors where all the scholars, from 100, or 1,000 years ago sat down and they, went through line by line. Sometimes I've been thinking a lot about the difference between interpreting and translating, and
yeah, I'm sure that in Judaism, there is that aspect as well. When Chezi and I go through a text, we're interpreting something at a very certain level, but we can't make practical sucks. Like we can't make practical judgments based on just like an interpretation that we have, and then we take it. Like that would be inappropriate for us, right? To have an interpretation on I think would be to have an interpretation on a text and just roll with it as our own, unless we align ourselves with an earlier scholar or sage. So within the interpretation, there are certain there are certain constraints how you interpret, but also like aligning yourself to somebody that had that previous interpretation, or kind of like deriving it from that particular. So it's a tricky game, but it's interesting. It reminded me, and Sandy, I know you're a writer as well, but it reminds me when I was thinking, when I was writing stuff or like making. So used to make short films, and I would create a short film, and then people would come up with lessons or like insights that they had about the story that I didn't necessarily think about, right? And that's kind of like a cliche of like how you can, a story might come with a certain kind of like a layer of insights or like a theme, but within that theme, you string around ideas and stuff like that you want to hit, but there are going to be things there that you're maybe not aware of. And this is where things become fuzzy, because are you not aware that you've put those things there, or are those things not there? Are they in other people's minds and then they put them there? So I don't know how to, we can probably have a discussion about that, but in some way, there are things like when people read or watch a movie, there is more there than the person creating that story, can control. Let's call it like that, right? So I forgot the main point that I wanted to make with that, but it just reminded me. So I don't know if that brings up anything for everybody else.
I don't know. I thought he did a pretty good job giving the Catholic argument against Protestantism.
Was that to me?
Just in general. Like that's what I thought of this bit. It's like, yes, the argument against sola scriptura.
Hey, how many crusades have you had? Just a quick question.
How many have you had? You may not have had the same name, but
I don't know. There's only one, when we say crusades, there's only one thing it's referring to. So that's all I gotta say. I'll say my piece.
It's not like we invented religious war.
You put that line out, Trey. My mind goes, yeah, Billy Graham. Didn't he have all kinds of crusades back in the day? Only they weren't the kind you're meaning.
Well, but I mean, you can look at that. Wouldn't that be one of the equivalent things? I mean, like what happened, like the recognition of the, let's call it, awfulness of the Crusades caused something within the church, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I see that as the same kind of like thing that he talks about, like in Judaism, and you can think about the inner strife within Judaism between different factions, and how they, those are things that you don't necessarily excuse, but you're looking to help you move forward or move higher from, right? To learn from Sada.
I do want to say that I think that, a serious comment about the Reformation. I think what it did allow is for at least harder conversations that I think that the church was pushing away. I think you have to admit that, how Judaism has handled debates has been very different from how the Catholic Church has handled debates. And I think at the very least, I think what the Reformation allowed was, I think in some sense, a decrease in war, because at the very least you couldn't really say there was no longer a singular Christianity where everything was against. Instead, you had fluctuations, which I think allowed for people to extend more charity to other beliefs.
In the long term, you're probably right. In the short term, it led to a lot more war.
How many wars were occurring in like the 700s? Like religious wars. Can you name one? What about the 800s?
We did have Islam come up around then, so
Yeah, well,
depends
Islam
on
was
what you
also
want to
like a
call it.
political thing. It wasn't like I believe in this version of Christianity.
Wait. Why are you making that point right now? Why are you saying those words?
Because I think it's different if you have a group of people invade your country and like start killing people and taking political control, and then to call that like a religious war. It's like I don't know if I would call that an exclusively religious war.
Okay, well, all religious wars are never an exclusively religious wars, right?
But again, I think your point was like there's less conflict within Christianity because of the Protestant Reformation. And I'm saying how many inter-Christian wars were occurring in the 800s?
No. Wait. That wasn't my point. My point was that I think that Christianity became more charitable to other beliefs.
Okay.
Like, I think it's very important, at least, like, for example, how slavery was stopped in the U.S. was not because of the Catholic Church or even the Protestants. It was really technically a heretical sect of the Quakers, who, like, you go back before the Reformation, I don't think anybody, like, the Catholic Church would probably just, like, kill them. You know what I mean?
I
But
don't think
because of the
that's
Reformation,
true.
There was a lot less killing people for beliefs before the Reformation than people
Yeah, I
tend
think
to
that
think.
I don't think that they were killing people that much.
I don't think that they were killing people that much.
For their religious
Well, okay,
beliefs,
fair.
no.
They just excommunicated him and kicked him out to the curb, pretty much.
Exile or death.
Okay, not the best, you know,
I'll choose
because
exile.
one of them feels like the other. But yeah, like, but back to at least a reasonably interesting point. Like, do you think that the Quakers would have been able to exist as a subsection in the Catholic Church without the Reformation?
Yeah.
I don't know how to answer that question, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't know that much, like, in detail about the Quakers, but I do also know that, like, in England, I don't think it was the Quakers. I think it was other groups. Maybe
Right.
it was also the Quakers. So it's not like they were the only group that could have ended slavery.
Yeah, but I think that, okay, the main point about the Quakers is that they rejected just war theory, and they were pretty much neutral.
I
You
think
mean
that the
radical
Catholic Church.
pacifists?
Or the pacifists, yeah, pacifists. I'm getting my terminology and stuff, yeah.
I think that religious orders in the Catholic Church fulfill the function that sectarianism and denomination splitting occurs in Protestantism. Like obviously there's some structure within the church that like orders things, but I think the different like groups, pretty distinct, like the Franciscans, the Dominicans, et cetera, et cetera. Like that's kind of the sectarianism that you see in Protestantism. So I think that there's ways that the Catholic Church incorporates them. So I think
And
if you
actually,
had
I
a
could
pacifist
see there
branch,
being an order that was kind of like the Quakers. I could see that happening.
yeah.
Could you say the Pope was wrong and still be a Catholic?
Technically, it depends on what. But for most things, yeah.
Okay. So what makes you Catholic then? I think that's the bigger question, I guess.
Well,
to
part of
understand.
it is I'll say he's wrong, but I'll obey anyway.
Sounds very Jewish.
I was just thinking.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah,
biggest
so
thing,
like I don't
especially
think
in
that
like
would be
modern
true.
day arguments.
Like, for example, if you truly believe that just war theory is wrong, or you think that every single Christian should not pull up arms, and like how do you resolve that? And like let's say like and you believe that. Like either you're convincing your pastor of doing that, and yeah, like does that make sense? Like you can't just obey.
Yes, I see what you're saying. And for just war theory in particular, I don't quite know what level that falls at. Because, of course, we have levels of like whether you have to agree to things or not. And I don't, so I don't know off the top of my head, like, I don't think pacifism is outlawed in the Catholic Church, though.
I feel like
Well,
we're
like-
talking about
But
the
then it just-
excluded middle over here because it sounds like Trey is trying to kind of like to do this. Like I said, is it A or is it B? But it's like I feel like there's a little bit more finesse here. I don't know about like I'm not the I have no idea about the Catholic obviously perspective, but just in general, I think it's when you ask questions about like is it A or is it B, completely A or completely B.
Well-
Rarely is the case.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, I think it's also a personal question, because I like it's kind of contemptuous. I think that God allows certain sects to exist to be reflections of improvement in the church. If I'm being honest. So, for example, I think that God allows Jehovah's Witnesses to exist, even though they're wrong on certain things, because I think it shows two things that the church should keep account. One, like the idea that church can't function without like capitalism inside of it, or at least like in, or I'm not going to say capitalism because that's too strong. I just mean passing the plate, and as well as that religions can't be innately neutral in political affairs. I think that's why God allows it to exist. But if that could have existed in the Catholic Church, that would have changed my whole conceptions. So I guess that's why I'm trying to sort of force it in.
I see.
Is what he's asking.
Yeah, I don't
that separation of
have
church
a
and
real
state
concrete
thing.
answer to that.
Didn't they used to have like, the monarch was, sort of more connected with the Catholic Church? Wasn't it more
Yeah.
uniform at one point?
Sorry, say that again. I like reloaded in the middle.
Oh, sorry. Well, separation of church and state, I thought, was more of a thing that come out during the Reformation things, and I thought that pre-Reformation there was more, like functioning together of the, whoever was in charge of each area and the church. And that
Yeah.
sounds like the second part of Trey's question.
I remember reading a book by David Bentley Hart, and he mentions how some of this separation of the different powers comes from Augustine, and then was like really emphasized starting in like the year 1000 with the Pope.
Oh yeah, because
saying,
City
like,
of God versus the City of the World, I think.
Yeah, and then the Pope kind of like steps away from a little bit of secular control. Obviously, there's still things like the Papal States, but that's what at least Hart kind of was arguing in his book. So.
Well, yeah, I think I'm not suggesting like merely like church and church and state separation. I'm talking like more foundational. Like I don't think any flag of a country should enter a church or be near a church. And I think that there shouldn't be any rituals which idolize the state if you're a Christian. That's pretty strong, but I think that those are sort of significant. Like I like it, like this is pretty contentious, but it's still something I feel strongly about. I do not think Christians should salute the flag. So yeah.
I don't know if I've heard that before, to be honest.
I didn't know you were supposed to salute the flag.
Or sing I Pledge Allegiance to it.
Or say the Pledge of Allegiance.
Can't you be both a Christian and a citizen of a country?
Right, but there should always like I like if you truly believe God exists and God has written those laws, right? You should only pledge allegiance to God. Like that's
Why?
like you should say, I understand the importance of the state.
Yeah.
But
I don't agree with that though.
But
Yeah.
Trey, here's a question: if God has created the entire world and all the nations of the world, and if He's got all the 70 nations or whatever, I keep hearing the number come up in Judaism, that isn't He invested also in those nations? So then if He puts you into a group of people, doesn't He expect you to have some loyalty to them also under that, that you, what's the phrase, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself? How do you live that out if you won't agree to some kind of allegiance to the people you're agreeing to love on His behalf or because of His command?
What I mean is the performative aspect of it. So for should Meshach, Meshach, blah blah blah, and Abednego, should they have bowed, right, as respect to the state? And I would say no, because God is higher.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's pretty similar to what you're doing when you're doing it to the flag. Now, of course, we can say that that it doesn't mean the same thing, but I think that those actions were very important. Like, for example, in God We Trust, that was a pretty recent thing, as well as saluting to the flag and saying those things. Those are pretty recent things. And the reason we did it pretty much was to battle anti-communist tendencies. And
battle communist tendencies.
Yeah, battle communist tendencies. Yes. Right? And it frightens me when we believe that an earthly representation can be God's representation. And I'll say that as a witness. I think that they have been too focused on earthly representations rather than godly representations that we can't see.
I mean, I will say I view them as very different things, but I will also point out that I come from the Christian tradition routinely accused of idolatry by all the other ones. So, except the Eastern Orthodox. So,
but even as a Protestant, as I'm learning more, you are still having representations of things inside the church. And I think that's very different. And so far, I haven't seen that many Catholic churches with American flags on it. I've seen way more Protestant churches with American flags on it. And that disturbs me.
I do feel like most Catholic churches will have an American flag and a Vatican flag.
But it just it feels like you're taking. I just don't think that it should mix. And maybe it's something that's coming from just deep within the heart. But if I understand what Meshach, can someone say the names of the three people? I forget.
Shadrach,
Meshach, and Abednego.
Yeah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. If I was always told that's a lesson, pretty much, of the political powers may tell you to bow for their idol, no matter what it will be, but God is always higher. And more than likely you will die, and sometimes God will save you, but you may die. And the reason I'm saying that is I think that there's there's a strong idea of keeping those ideas close to your heart that prevents war. That's what I'm trying to sort of tie it around to.
Mm.
I'm not saying the witnesses got it right with this. There's a lot of evidence that there was definitely some sullying to, the Nazi estate. But the witnesses went into the camps. And I'm not saying that they're better than anybody else, but I think it was because of how much they understood the idea of God's government is more important. Nothing in this earthly government is going to change it.
I see what you're getting at. I feel like it's Christian flavored globalism, and I have a problem with that part. Because I feel like it's not very tenable, but it's also really far off track. So if we want to circle back, we can do that too.
That's fair.
Elijah, where were we?
We are still on chapter 13. Jonathan said that he, I don't hear any cracking, Jonathan. Jonathan said he got tired of Rabbi Sachs. So maybe he doesn't have anything to say, just maybe a sarcastic remark.
No, I just wanted to come and have some moral support and wasn't sure if the conversation was going to get derailed, in which case I could offer more relevant commentary. But yeah, I guess my parting comment for this book club series is I lost the script. I gave up on the book. I just can't keep going on it. Yeah, I don't. The first time I've really given up on a book midway through. I don't know.
Damn, poor Jonathan Sachs.
Yeah, my namesake.
That Noahide gives one thumbs down to this rabbi's book.
Yep.
You feel like you made a mistake with Noahidism after reading Rabbi Sachs's book?
No. It doesn't change my beliefs at all. There's nothing I disagree with necessarily, even in the book. It's either a review or too much of a survey, and I don't know, just kind of boring to me. But that's just me. That's just me. I'm looking forward to the next one.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right. Any other comments on this chapter before we go to the problem of evil chapter? Because we've been on it for an hour, so.
Really? Wow, we have.
Yes. 5. All right. Nobody can comment ever again on chapter 13. It's completely banned. All right. But Ben's the kind of guy with questions. And Ben's the kind of guy that gives commentary to different chapters. So why don't you open up chapter 12 for us, Ben?
Okay. I don't know what I have, honestly, but well, chapter 12. So this is the one coming after 11. So that's the first comment I can make.
Deep.
Yeah, but it was interesting. Well, I'm trying to think, but it was interesting to go through his interpretation and just kind of like the commentary about Job, book of Job. And I think the theme that, or kind of like it's kind of what we discussed before, that it's not what he says there specifically is about not seeking explanation, like how seeking an explanation, even just something very simplistic, is kind of like not the point, or it is not the right way. It's more about seeking the meaning. And I should have looked this up, but I think there's something about what Moses does as well in Exodus, that he keeps questioning or asking God about something specific, and there's a good way that he does it, and there's like a bad way that he does it. The bad way is something about placing judgment on something, so calling something evil or deeming it evil was something that was like it was not the right way that he was having that discussion with God. So that's what it reminded me of. But in general, I'm curious what people think about this idea of how the right way that you should go about something is, or at least how that comes up in the Job story, is the accepting it, but seeking the meaning. So it's not like acceptance, right? He says, and I guess that's the final thing I'll tie into this is, well, at 240, he says that this Judaism is a religion of protest, not acceptance. And I'm just curious if other people, if they kind of recognize that dichotomy, and if like in Christianity, that if that is like if there's like a similar idea, or like that sounds familiar. I'm just, but yeah.
I think there's a bit in the Exodus series where Dennis Prager makes this point between the difference where like Jews say like, oh, they're suffering, and they're like, this sucks, we don't like it, but Christians are like willing to accept it in some way. I don't remember that exactly, but it seems like there's also like, oh, maybe when they're suffering, you're like, oh, I am being Christ-like if I accept this suffering well, or because there's not that concept in Judaism. It's kind of like, wow, this really sucks, we should try and not have it happen. So I guess one problem I have with this is I'm unsure as to how to separate meaning and explanation.
Yeah.
And
I
he
had a
kind
hard
of like
time.
says there's an explanation and there's meaning, and I'm like, I'm not sure where to draw the line. Like, you're using these two words and I'm just not.
Well, I mean, if we take your example, I'm not sure either. Let's say, right? Like I can't I can articulate it well. So, if we take your example of what you just said, of like there is suffering, and one perspective would be this sucks, let's stop it, let's figure out how to stop this, and the other perspective is, well, this is let's say God's plan, and like we'll deal with it. I could see the former, right? Seeking, well, yeah. So well, let's start with the latter. That's easier. But the latter would be more like, okay, what we can do is maybe explain like what is happening, right? Just understand what is happening. But it's just like understanding the cold information around it, but not doing necessarily something with it. And then maybe the former, the one that says this sucks, is trying to understand or interpret something so that there could be an action that follows from it. I don't know.
Because I usually just feel like the way you fix a problem is by understanding what caused it, which is kind of like the explanation for the thing. And then there's also like, I feel like meaning is derived from context, but yeah, and again, I feel like context requires an explanation, right?
Well, the how you solve a problem might be trying to figure out the detail of it, but solving the problem requires a perspective and a narrative, like you trying to go from A to B. That's the meaning part of it, and that is like I can like me even wanting to go from one place to another requires that right? That there is, let's say, a better place or like a place to move from. And in order for me to move from A to B, maybe I require an explanation of just like the field of options that I have. But at first, I just need to know that this is a problem, and I need to have that like that kind of interpretation, maybe. Yeah, I hear what you're saying because it's hard. I'm trying to play with that language, and it's still hard to kind of like put it together. But I do feel there is something underneath it.
So, but explanation and meaning are not the same thing, because you can have an explanation of something. You know, like when I would take Jacob into the hospital for surgery, they would explain all the procedures. They would explain, you know, they would explain the what is there, what needs to be done, and how they're going to do it. Which means they're kind of like filling in the gaps in, you know, it's not a dot jot. An explanation is larger than just the this. That's not the meaning. Meaning isn't meaning more like we would go and we'd sit in the genetics office and they would ask for a history of both sides of the family, and they would look at the possibilities behind. So did some of his bone issues, did anybody else in the family have similar things? Could they trace it to something where it could have been an inheritable thing? Because there's some things that were like this that were inherited, and some things that were just what they called environmental, which means, well, we don't know what, but something happened in your third trimester, and now this has happened. You know, it's not been sort of sitting there waiting to happen. You know, it wasn't a matter of something coded into the egg or the sperm. It's actually just an event that occurs at a certain point in time. And when you're digging for meaning, you're looking at sources, and kind of isn't explanation kind of like rounding out your texts and meaning more like interpreting them?
I feel like what you just described is like for me what I heard is like that is the explanation. So like that is the facts, let's see, on the ground, kind of like the facts, right, of a particular situation. The interpretation, the meaning would be what you do with that. Like, what do you want to do with that is like what you, right? You can get a set of, let's say you go to a doctor, the doctor can tell you have this, this, and this. You need to interpret, or the doctor interprets that information to give you advice. Or you do something, you know, you can get a diagnosis from a doctor because you want to get better or because you want to get worse. I don't know, right? Like I want to know my weaknesses so that I can do better, whatever. I'm just trying to think about a ridiculous situation.
Well, then, for me, the meaning is a harder place, because the meaning is the why that I've tried to explain to people for years. The meaning is how can I make myself look more stupid? When I was pregnant, I thought I had this sudden sense that Jacob was going to be like my sister, who we adopted, with all kinds of developmental disorders. The meaning is me arguing with God, going, I don't think I can do that. Why are you asking me to do that? Meaning is me taking all the arguments and things away and having this strong sense that, hey, I'm handing you this particular problem to solve. And by the way, this kid's a leader. And what are you going to do with this? And so meaning is everything after the fact of the explanation and everything prior to the fact of the explanation. And the explanation is just this little pivot point in the middle for me. You know, it's what does it look like? You know, it's like the thing at the top of one of those studies that people do that says, this is what we're going to be talking about. This is what we chose to do. But meaning is everything that I derived from it. You know, it's the why did I choose ASL? It's the why did we move from one spot to another so as he could stay at home and still be in the deaf school? It's the meaning is something way bigger than just an explanation. meaning has an impact. An explanation you can sit and mull over, but meaning changes something. At least for me, that's kind of when I try to dig into the story I just told you. I'm like, well, then if what you said is true, then meaning was the main reason for my life.
Yeah, I wonder if this maps onto kind of like the Vervaeke, like you can think about the explanation being propositional and maybe meaning being at least perspectival, if not participatory as well.
Leaning hard into the places I'm still learning where you guys all talk about those words and then jump into embodiment, because if I aim for meaning and I don't get as far as embodiment, then I haven't derived the full meaning from it. And I'm like saying this is where I sound like an idiot, because I don't really know what I'm talking about. I'm just speaking from, living from the gut for 36 years. Sorry, tree walk day. I'm just thinking. Yeah. It's still fascinating to me that Jacob has taken all of the what that I, worked so hard to get into him. And yeah, I go down there and he's bigger inside now. Like he's more full of something, Before it was just here is what the DSMV says, and here's what the teachers know, and here's what you are going to do because this is what the rules say. And why can you get him to do things that we can't? I'm not following those rules. I'm following that stupid conversation that I had with God about the whole thing before ever, he came into the world. So here's your problem to solve. And by the way, he's a leader, so go to it, have fun. Like, thanks. Actually, it has been fun. Horrible and fun. But is that how that's not how other people define meaning. I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe Vervaeke's getting at it, like you said. Hey, Trey. Does anybody else actually have like areas of life where this just kind of sits there and you're going, oh my goodness, of course that's it? Like, this is how I would divide these up because this is how my life is and this is my walk and this is my... Feel free to tell me I'm weird.
What was the question again?
Doesn't anybody else do this kind of processing? Like, do you guys have
a processing of what?
I don't know. I was really excited listening to Vervaeke, and then you brought him up because I'm kind of like, yeah. And here I am adamantly saying, but if you don't get to embodiment, and I'm not even sure that I have other people's definitions that they've gleaned from him. I just have questions I'm pinging off to see if instinct is right. So what would it, in the scenario you just described, bringing up Vervaeke, saying, so maybe this is like when Vervaeke says, and you got through, I'm blanking on the words because now the only word in my head is embodiment. Where does that last piece come into that?
And I mentioned that like the meaning might map, or kind of like at least what Sachs is saying by meaning is like more like the perspectival, and the participatory, right? I mean, it's the axiomatic is like the where you are, when you see your perspective, when you see information,
Mm-hmm.
is going to define how you're going to use it in a way. And obviously, this is more dynamic, right? Transjective, like what Vervaeke would say. I mean, there's a play between you and the object or the fact or whatever it is. But I feel like that is the thing that you control. Like you can use an apple to to eat it or to throw it at somebody's head. And it depends on the meaning of the apple for you. Is it a weapon or is it a piece of fruit?
I was going to say depends on the day. Yeah. Okay, so that takes care of moving from explanation to meaning in Vervaeke's language. What does he mean by embodiment then? Because am I stepping beyond meaning into some kind of outcome? Like is explanation and meaning simply before you act upon something?
Does anybody have thoughts about that?
I don't think I don't think I'm listening to Vervaeke enough to really give any Vervaeke takes. So
Jump back
So,
Yeah, I don't really know.
rein us in.
Next chapter.
no, it's fine. There are other things in here. So it's on page 245 of my book. The kind of first paragraph on there. He talks about starting on the other page, like Maimonides' explanations for the suffering in the world. And I don't understand where earlier he's like, oh man, all these theodicies are terrible. And then his ending is like, what if I give the free will theodicy, but I don't call it a theodicy? And so I'm just like, he dismisses theodicies all at the beginning of the chapter, and then he ends with the theodicy. And I'm just like, really?
Oh, we're on the problem of suffering chapter, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that he really dropped the ball on this one. Like, this is probably like the most important chapter you should at least try to care about, and he sort of succeeded every single one of the arguments. But I'll agree with you, Clown.
So Elijah,
he
you
probably-
said it's 245.
Trey, you're kind of breaking in and out. All we ever heard was you agree with me, which is, of course, obvious. Trey and I, we agree on everything. So that's great. Thanks for that, Trey. Glad you got my back, buddy.
What were you quoting, Elijah? 245, is that the page?
It kind of starts at the end of 244, like the second kind of evil is the evil which humans commit against other humans, and then it ends at the kind of first full paragraph on 245.
Yeah.
And that's kind of his free will theodicy explanation for the problem of evil. And I just thought it was strange because he was so against theodicies earlier in the chapter, and then he just ends with like another very basic explanation for the problem of evil. So,
Well, was he rejecting theodicy as a concept?
It certainly seemed like it, at least in my reading of it.
Yeah, I
could-
kind of thought so
Mhm.
too.
Because he's like, oh, that's Greek. That's Greek philosophy. I hate Greek. And it's like, and then you quote Maimonides, who's like definitely not known for liking Aristotle. Definitely not an Aristotle fan. So I just don't know.
Hater.
Yeah, where does he three responses, first religious and then otherworldly, the second religious and this worldly, the third non-religious or anti-religious. What they have in common is that they are all ultimately philosophies of acceptance. So it seems why do people think otherwise? There is, after all, a whole discipline of theology known as theodicy, defined as the vindication of God's goodness and justice in the face of the existence of evil. How can I claim, as I do here, that this entire discipline is inapplicable to the Hebrew Bible in the original form of Abrahamic spirituality? So to me, that's on page 240. It's the last full paragraph on the page. And that's why I thought that him at the end quoting Maimonides and giving them the free will theodicy just seemed totally strange.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I was saying is I do agree with you, Clown, on this rare occasion. But that does seem like Sack's sort of formula a little bit, where he's like, you're totally right. But secretly, you're wrong. You know what I mean?
The other problem I had with this chapter is it feels like, and I think this comes up in one of the monotheism chapters too. Like he gives all these arguments for like why atheism is right, basically. And then he says, I can't logically argue against this, but I personally just can't accept a world in which that's true. So I'm just going to not. And this is the result. And that doesn't seem like a strong argument to me.
Well, I mean, I would say that he just rejects the argument for that. Like he rejects Kierkegaardian existentialism, which I think is what he's arguing. I think personally, at the very least, a little bit of Pascal, a little bit of Kierkegaard, but he rejects those two people, which I don't understand why he does that.
Can I tell a joke?
Yeah.
Is it funny?
I don't know. You tell me. Yeah, I can only say it's funny after I tell it.
So you're gonna have to leave the room if we don't all laugh. You're gonna have to leave. So
No problem. I have to go to the bathroom anyway. So, well, no, it's a short, but it's anyway. So two guys come to a rabbi. You might have heard this before. You probably did. But two guys come to a rabbi and they tell him they have a certain problem, and one guy says, "I loaned something to my friend, and he took it. And he's not returning, and he owes me money now." And the rabbi says, "You're right. You're right." And then the other guy says, "Well, he didn't give me anything, like because we didn't end up making that transaction, so I don't owe him anything." So the rabbi says, "You're right. You're right." And then so the rabbi's wife hears this from the side, so she comes into the room. She texts the rabbi. She takes him to the side, and she tells, "Listen, you can't tell both people that they're right. It's not going to work." So the rabbi tells her, "You're right. You're right."
Right.
So to
I've
me,
heard
it's
that one.
simple. And you're like a lot of the things that you mentioned is kind of like around that joke. But obviously, it's not. It's that joke in itself is not a satisfying explanation in itself, right? It's just saying that everybody's right. So point taken. But I just find that helpful.
But can't Judaism allow for everybody to be right, pretty much?
Can or can't?
I think he's
allow-
asking if
Allowed.
it can.
If it can allow everybody to be right. I don't know. That's probably a very broad question. I tend to say probably no. I mean, you can't have just everybody. Look, there are wrong maybe ideas or something, but I mean, you probably have to be more specific for me to, to continue this.
God only gives religion to one.
We can't hear you again, Trey.
One second.
It's only when you say the good things is that we can't hear you.
Yeah, really.
It's like when you drop the bombs, it's like suddenly.
Okay, I'm gonna try again. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess because how I've always understood it, if you're a Gentile, right, and you believe Judaism is correct, you're kind of out of luck. You know what I mean? Like it just kind of sucks. You don't got your place to meet and everything like that. So seems like it would make more sense that God would sort of allow other religions to be at least some access of salvation, and to be right in some sense. Because he basically said, the rest of y'all, I don't really care about y'all, but only the Jews that care about. Does that make sense?
Well, one thing I asked before on the Discord was the Jewish understanding of salvation, and Jacob, I think, said that salvation is only physical salvation in Judaism. So the way I think you use salvation is like a form of spiritual salvation, right?
What guarantees life after death? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think the Jewish response from what Jacob said is there is no, spiritual salvation doesn't necessarily exist, but anyone can become close to God regardless. So you don't have to follow some sort of set pattern of religious observance. You don't have to do little bowing or you kumbayas or little rock bands in the strip mall.
Well, doesn't Sachs point to this in this book about? Yes, I don't know about the spiritual salvation doesn't exist necessarily.
Okay.
I don't think that's from my understanding that would be like a principle, but I think that Sachs was saying something actually that salvation is not dependent on you being Jewish or not. Salvation is for whether spiritual or not. So, I think that also in terms of spiritual, if you say the world to come, Olam Haba, it's like there are a very few people that will be exempt from that. If we want to talk about that, but but I don't think that it is specific for Jews. I'm trying to think I think I remember something about Sachs mentioning that.
Well, I think for spiritual salvation to exist, there needs to be spiritual danger in a particular way, right? Where there's something that you need to be saved from that's outside of your control, that you would need God's hand to come in. But I think the message is generally that, you have the power to do it, so you don't need, some extra outside force.
Yeah, I don't know.
There's Trey again. It's just if he would stop driving so much, then maybe it would be better.
Yeah.
You guys talking about me?
Yeah, but you driving
Yeah.
all around town.
I know.
All right, Sandy, you've been quiet. What do you think about this chapter, Sandy?
I thought more about it when I first read it. I was really ready to discuss it last week. What do I think? I don't know. I hung out a lot on page 244, 45, which I talked about before, but I've got a lot of little notes and things down the bottom of 245 on that paragraph. Where you were talking about free will, and he talks about evil exists because we exist as free beings in a physical world with all the accidents of matter and pain of mortality. What difference then does it make whether our attitude towards evil is one of acceptance or protest? It makes all the difference. Abraham's protest and Moses and Jeremiah's were not mere cries wasted in the wind. They were cries born in the cognitive dissonance between the world that is and the world that ought to be. The only way of resolving this dissonance is a deed. That's the difference between faith as acceptance and faith as protest. You guys talked about this earlier, but this is the part that kind of the only way to deal with slavery is lead people to freedom. The only way to confront the evils of the police is to build a more just social order. Special emphasis on loving the stranger. God and Abraham's faith is not the solution to a contradiction, but the call to a journey that will eventually change the world by showing there's another way to live, an alternative to the will to power. It's no accident that those raised in this faith are disproportionately found to be among lawyers fighting injustice, economists fighting poverty, doctors and medical researchers fighting disease, and teachers and academics fighting ignorance. Philosophy does not change the world, but faith does. I've got more notes, but so, and over on 247, related to the previous page, I've got just the one sentence underlined. God is not the solution to a contradiction, but a call to become his partners in the work of redemption. When I was talking about, my son under the difference between explanation and meaning, that's kind of like the place that grabs it for me. We walk with God, we're partners. He gives me a problem to solve. He's not going to then abandon me to solve it. He walks with me. We have free will, but we're not 2-year-olds let loose with all sorts of inappropriate toys in the playground. There is. Oh, you have a cat. Or at least a cat tail. Everybody here has cats, not me. I am at the moment without cats. I think the only part of that whole chapter that grabbed me is just that he comes back again. There's all these contradictions, but at the same time, there's God, and he's walking with me, and that's all I've got in life. So I didn't have any huge takeaways from this chapter. I already kind of know that.
Emma, did you have any takeaways or insights from the chapter?
I I don't know. Although, as we're sort of talking through it again, I feel like I'm seeing it a little bit more clearly and seeing more clearly, like, sort of what he means and what he's trying to get at with, like, theodicy versus his argument, which I think is very focused on the, like, cry against suffering, against evil. Like, it didn't make sense to me when I was first reading it. Like, I couldn't figure out what he was getting at. But now I don't necessarily agree with him, but I sort of see why he's kind of opposing religion and logic, which I hadn't really gotten before.
Why do you think he does that?
I think he really views them as dealing with two, like, maybe not completely different, but significantly different, like, worlds and situations. And he talks about, like, the religious mind begins not with the world there might hypothetically be, but with the world that is. And I think he really does just see, like, religion is not to explain why there is evil, it is to respond to the evil. And why there is evil is not, it's not even relevant.
Right. That's the Moses.
For
That's
him.
what I mentioned with the Moses. Yeah. Why not you? Yeah. You said why is there evil and what to do with it, or how to respond to it, or to respond to it. Is the
Religion is about responding to it, not figuring out why.
Yeah, and I guess that's a little bit different what we said, because you can think that interpretation or explanation is how versus interpretation, which is why. But what you just said is that interpretation is not the why, or like, yeah, the protest is not about asking why, it's about doing something about it. So that's kind of where it's hard to, but I do think that what you just said, Emma, is kind of like probably is what he means, because I can also, that sounds familiar to me from, like, the interpretation of, like, the conversation that Moses has, and how he goes about it when he does it right and when he doesn't do it right is basically like, why did you do this evil thing? That's when he asks God that at some point, and that's a no-go. So you're not going to do it. And then God goes like, okay, he's not going to go to Israel. He's not going to go to all that. But like, for all the other arguments, in all the good ways that he does it, where he tries to respond, or, be trying to save the people, basically, right? He's there.
And that's why Abraham arguing with God is the right response, whereas Moses asking why is not.
Right. That's, yeah. Because he tries to do something about it, not asking why. Which is the Job idea, right? This is like goes back to the Job about, like, why is this happening to me? That's and I keep going, for me, like, I really like I don't know if people have seen this movie, The Serious Man, by the Coen brothers. It's a very good movie.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Here we go. We got Trey going. Yeah, so that's so it's really it's a Job story, and the whole movie is about the protagonist. All these things happening to him, and he keeps asking why. But that's not the question. That's not, it doesn't get resolved. But that doesn't mean that you just resign yourself to what happens.
I'm not so sure I'm satisfied with this because I don't know who it was, but there's some atheist at, I don't know, Oxford or Cambridge, and I saw something in, he said like, like that there are such things as like stupid questions, right? Like the questions that science can't answer are stupid questions. And I feel like this is almost in some ways the opposite, right? Like don't ask this kind of question. And I find that even from the other side to be just as annoying. I guess.
I don't think it's satisfying. I just think I actually understand what he's trying to say now.
Oh, for sure.
I still don't like it.
Yeah.
So you're saying, Elisha, you're saying you don't like the fact that he says asking why is a stupid question.
Yeah, so when the atheist person says like, like why did we come into being, or like why should we do X or why should we do Y, or these kind of questions, he didn't like that. He said only give scientific explanations.
Mm-hmm.
And this feels like then the opposite, where like only ask for those why questions in terms of like meaning or whatever, but don't ask the questions in terms of explanations, like why are you doing this, God? And God's like, don't ask that question.
Yeah, I totally agree. I tend to think that there's a thing here with a leaning, a bias towards, or like a correction that kind of like Sachs is proposing here in a sense. This is me reading favorably, right? In terms of trying to tell people it's more important to think about to be the active about something, and then you can think about the how, right? It's kind of like what we say about having the scientific frame within the religious frame. Like you don't want to say, like you don't want to just start meddling with things and like doing research on this and this and that. You want to kind of like set the boundaries, maybe. But this is the debate, right? Like, how do you do this in a way that's not too restrictive? It's a good point.
So when you first said that, it sounded like, or it reminded me of your conversation with Hezi this afternoon. And I think he was saying something to you about his dad, saying you don't just have a plan B, you have a plan B for your plan B, or a plan C for your plan B. And so you're thinking, like, you're planning your actions, you're planning your steps, but is it actually connected? Am I mishearing that, or is that related to what you were just saying about it's about the action?
I'm not sure how that's related.
Okay.
Like I'm happy to kind of like understand, but I'm trying to think.
When I was listening this afternoon, it was simply the fact that, if you have a plan A and you have a plan B, I don't remember which section of that you were reading.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're talking about it now, it's like you don't just stop because, your first two plans failed. You're always thinking, you always have a plan for what you're going to do next, kind of thing. So there's always a next action to take.
Right. I think that was like the seeing. It was one of the verses about explaining about someone and how he is. I don't know if it was Rabbi Yossi, maybe Jacob knows about it. He roe et hanolad. He sees what is to come. So, yeah, I mean that could be related in terms of like you having a sense of the meaning of things and how. So things don't necessarily surprise you because you can orient yourself around them. In an easier way. It might take you, like everything will, whether you have meaning or not in your life, like things can happen to you that are going to like throw you off balance. The question is, how do you recover from that? So that's I guess that's where I see the connection.
First, we had Jonathan sitting in the middle with his chin on his hands, just staring at us.
That's not Jonathan anymore, my
Then he
friend.
laughed and
I just came on to apologize.
why?
I thought if I did a 5 o'clock stream and ended it right before the book club, it would get a lot of people watching the book club.
Classic tactic.
And instead, everyone came to see Father Stephen and then was disappointed when a fucking clown joined the stream. And we're like, what the heck is this? This is awful.
I actually think you probably got a bunch of people at the beginning of the book club that you wouldn't have gotten if I hadn't done that stream. So
He's back. Almost.
Hello.
Hey, Trey.
did you
How's it going?
announce the book, right? The next book?
Jacob, your
You didn't watch the beginning of the book club?
I was busy.
Wow. And I guess I'll reiterate my point. You do a lot of Kabbalah propaganda, but then this Nagdim, they have a certain power in this little corner.
I
What do
wonder
you mean?
who. I don't think
That is
I
all
voted for him.
Kabbalistic. Like that is the Lurianic Kabbalah. If you're looking for non-Kabbalistic, Lonely Man of Faith may be the last book you want to look at. Like the whole thing is contrasting Adam Rishon and Adam Kadmon.
Okay.
You haven't read it yet,
Okay.
obviously.
Oh, Trey, let's not talk. All right. Jacob and I have our fights, but nothing like you and Jacob. All right.
We don't argue over spiritual matters.
You don't?
I don't think so. Okay. It's only politics that, deranges your brain.
If you say so.
All right. Any closing comments for the book? We got about 8 minutes.
We're not done, are we?
In 8 minutes, we'll be done, or I'll be done. You can stay on.
Not the book. I think we've got one more, don't we? Or are we done?
We're,
We have one more.
We've
Yeah,
got
we have one more
more
study, for this book club.
And,
Oh, yeah.
And in case Elijah didn't mention, every other week when there is a book club, Elijah and I are going to be doing Vikwa Haramban, the Great Disputation.
Nice.
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 And then Elijah will explain why he hates Christianity so much.
Wow.
And then we'll get married.
Wow, Trey. Okay.
Things are heating up.
2 things that aren't true. I hate Christianity and that I would ever marry Trey.
Shadow is sticking her head out of the valley of the shadow of death.
She's cute.
I know.
She was horrified by that statement that you just said, Jacob.
How's Happy?
Happy is good. I'm not sure if Happy and Shadow were both sick at the same time, or if it was just Shadow was sick. But
Oh.
now Shadow lets Happy lick her, which she used to not do.
Well, because we're discussing pets, I'm assuming that nobody has anything else to say about the book. So, for the next week, we'll read chapter 14, Why God, and also the epilogue, A Letter to a Scientific Atheist. And then the week after that, we'll start on the Lonely Man of Faith. So,
All right.
get your orders in.
You can actually get the Lonely Man of Faith on PDF online for free. So
And maybe someone will link that
Legally?
to the book club.
Is that Is that a question worth asking?
Oh, you want to
Are
read that one too?
referring to the archive site or a different-
Yeah. So Lonely Man of Faith was published before digital rights were a thing, and so the digital rights are not reserved halachically. So basically, you can, and that's why printed editions are so cheap. I have one around here, right there.
I did notice the printed edition was extremely cheap.
Yeah.
But I'm a heathen who prefers ebooks, so.
Do they have ebooks?
Well, PDFs, ebooks.
PDFs. I actually have to wonder if anybody's actually done the Audible, like done the reading, and if they haven't, I might just do it myself
For the lonely men of faith.
and make tons of money. Tons and tons of money.
Yeah.
I'll do the sound effects. You need sound. You need, like, if it's about Genesis, then we need some sound effects.
Well, it has to be somebody who can speak in Ashkenazis.
I can't do that.
No, actually, I think the Rav would have preferred Ivrit. I always laugh when people call him Yosef Dov Soloveitchik. His name was Yosef Ber Soloveitchik.
Mm-hmm.
Dov is the Hebrew of bear.
Mm-hmm. The Jewish bear.
All right. Well, with that wonderful note about the Jewish bear, this is a Jewish end to our Jewish book club. Make sure to read chapter 14 and the epilogue. Get your copies or find a link in the book club. Thank you for all coming.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
You gonna really end it? Oh dang.